Nothing stays underground anymore. The second something becomes interesting, it becomes visible. And the second it becomes visible, it becomes content. And I don't think we've really processed what that's done to culture. Because there was a time when things existed without being seen. Scenes existed in rooms, in basements, in cities, in very specific places, with very specific people. If you weren't there, you didn't know. And that wasn't a limitation, that was the actual structure of it. Because culture had time to develop before it was consumed. Now everything is visible immediately. And I think that changes what subculture actually is. Subculture wasn't just aesthetic, it was position. It was people deciding consciously or not that they didn't belong to what already existed in the world. And instead of adapting, they just created something else. There's a cultural theorist called Hebdige who wrote about this in Subculture, the meaning of style. And one of his main ideas is that style isn't random, it communicates. Punk wasn't just ripped clothing and culture, it was resistance. Goth wasn't just black clothing and moodiness, it was emotional expression. Rave wasn't just music and drugs, it was escapism. But more importantly, these weren't just aesthetics, they were environments. You had to physically be there. You had to go to the clubs, the shows, the spaces. You met people. You shared time. You built something collectively. And because of that, subculture had depth. It had rules, values, boundaries, even gatekeeping, which isn't always negative if you think about it. Because sometimes gatekeeping protects meaning. It stops things from being reduced too quickly. And I think that's important because once meaning disappears, all you're left with is just the surface. Now discovery works differently. You don't go looking for subcultures anymore. They arrive to you through algorithms, through scrolling, through repetition. And because of that, you see things before you understand them. You engage with aesthetics before you know their context. There's a sociologist called Thornton who wrote about subcultural capital, which basically is the idea that status in subcultures comes from knowledge. Knowing the music, knowing the references, knowing the history. But now, that system gets disrupted because information is everywhere. So instead of building knowledge slowly and being part of it as it grows, people absorb fragments instantly. You see a look, you like it, you adopt it without necessarily knowing where it came from. And again, this isn't about blaming anyone. It's structural. The system itself changed, but the result is that identity becomes more assembled than experienced. You build yourself from references, images, clips, aesthetics, and over time that creates distance between appearance and meaning, the aesthetic and the context, the identity and the experience. The internet doesn't just show culture, it processes it. There is a theorist called Hito Steyerl who talks about how images circulate online, how they get compressed, reposted, recontextualized. and eventually detached from its origin. And I think that's exactly what happens to subculture now. Something exists in a specific place. Someone else records it. It gets uploaded, it gets reposted, then it gets edited, then it gets turned into content. And eventually, it no longer belongs to where it came from. It belongs to the feed. And once it becomes content, it becomes easy to replace. Brands can reproduce it. People can imitate it. Algorithms can amplify it. And you see this constantly within the world of fashion. A small scene, a small group of people, a small movement creates something. Then it appears online. Then it spreads. Then it gets simplified. Then it gets commercialized. And then within months, it no longer holds the same meaning. Because meaning doesn't travel as well as visuals do. I think one of the biggest things we've lost is mystery. There's a writer called Mark Fisher who talks about how culture feels increasingly repetitive and transparent. Like everything is immediately available. Nothing feels distant anymore. And distance used to matter because distance creates curiosity, creates desire. It gives things time to build meaning. Now everything is documented, written down, and slapped on the post-it notes. Constantly. People show their process, their ideas, their routines, their lives. While that all can be inspiring and eye-opening and world-building, it also removes space. Nothing stays hidden long enough to become a myth. Nothing stays obscure long enough to develop its own identity. And when everything becomes visible, it becomes harder for anything to feel special. Because you've already seen it before it's even finished. I don't think people are just chasing aesthetics. I think they're chasing feeling. I think they're chasing connection. I think they're chasing a belonging. And I think they're chasing a shared identity. There's a theorist called Benedict who described nations as imagined communities. Groups of people who feel connected, even if they never meet. And I think online culture creates a similar structure, but without the same depth. Because subcultures used to be physical, localized, and embodied. Now they're visual, global, and temporary. You can participate visually without being connected emotionally. And I think that's where the disconnect comes from, because visibility isn't the same as belonging. You can see everything and still feel like you're not part of anything. Maybe underground culture didn't disappear. Maybe the conditions that allow it to exist just changed. Obscurity is harder now. Time moves so much faster. And visibility is constant. And when everything becomes visible, it becomes consumable. And when it becomes consumable, it becomes temporary. But there is hope. I do still think people want something real. They want something slower. Something that isn't immediately translated into content. Because maybe what people miss isn't just underground culture. Maybe they miss the feeling of being part of something that wasn't designed to be seen.